and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now let's start the show on a positive note. Today is Malaysia's best day, according to our Director General of Health, Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah. Malaysia recorded only 69 new COVID-19 infections today, and that is the second time this week that the daily increase was below 100 cases. And speaking of the Director General of Health, a letter to him by 9-year-old Lara Khatijah McAfee from Terengganu has gone viral on social media. In that letter, she thanked the Director General for all his hard work and gifted him a loom band, which is a kind of rubber woven bracelet, to which the Director General replied with a thank you note that he signed from your new friend, Dr. Hisham. It warmed a lot of people's hearts. Sharaad, did you catch a glimpse of these letters?
I did indeed, and because that follows, the cures that he and other doctors around the world, namely those leading the fight in their nations to battle the pandemic, who've earned praise. Praise coming from a Chinese television station rebranded. I didn't actually recognize the name of the station, Melisa, initially, because apparently it's a rebranded name for CCTV.
That's right. So China Global TV Network had named Dr. Hisham as one of the top 3 doctors in the world for his approach in handling the COVID-19 pandemic. So earning praise all over the world, and also from Terengganu, from Lara. I do have to say, though, the photos of the letters from Lara and from Dr. Hisham have been going viral on social media, but don't forward them on if you see that her contact details on the letter have not been redacted. Something to take note before you forward, you pass on this heartwarming message, to be mindful that this is a child's contact details and her address. So to redact that before you pass it on.
Yeah, because the other thing is, and there's not so much rancor, but I mean there are concerns of the need to, in fact, heap praise on a single person.
Yes.
To turn, to turn the Director General into some sort of hero. There, of course, he himself was very quick to share the limelight with others in his team. He called it a team. He called it a team effort. So I guess he true to form, coming across as a rather modest man without rancor, something that often is missing in many politicians and leaders in Malaysia. So this is the man who seems to have, won the hearts of Malaysians for being quite modest and frank.
But I agree with you. I think that often in times of crisis, we do look for leadership. We do want to kind of look for a hero type figure, and just to be wary not for us to be too quick to do that. Sometimes in times of confusion and crisis, we want to simplify things in the story that we tell ourselves. We want the heroes and the villains, just to be mindful not to do that, because of course never place anyone on a pedestal, because they will always fall short.
Yeah, and nobody's infallible.
That's
and I think what is very true about the situation, as we see globally, Melisa, so many different strategies have emerged with mixed results.
Right.
And what we need is a robust discussion of what is peculiar to the Malaysian situation, what would work in the Malaysian situation, and that actually requires differences of opinion.
Sure.
So if you make somebody a hero, you might actually not want to criticize them. That is not good at the end of the day. All
right. Well, in other news now, concerns have been raised over Malaysia's decision to turn back a boat carrying about 200 Muslim Rohingya refugees, including children, that was attempting to enter the country illegally. Now, this comes after another report yesterday that at least 24 Rohingya died at sea after their boat failed to reach Malaysia. Authorities in Bangladesh said they rescued some 400 Rohingya from the vessel, which had been adrift for weeks. A Reuters report had quoted an official as saying they were at sea for about 2 months and were starving.
Yeah, so there are conflicting reports about how the Malaysian authorities conducted themselves, whether they actually had supplied these refugees with food before pushing them away. Nevertheless, there is this, I think, a very difficult conversation that now is going to happen. When there was, in fact, some resistance to us and the generosity that the Malaysian government and authorities showed, and in fact the Malaysian public showed to refugees and the Rohingya in particular. those now will be also looking at the question of disease. And then, so again, this will become a specter that puts fear in Malaysians and makes them put aside their more humanitarian impulses.
On that note, Sharaad, now, exactly, that there was fears that this group might bring COVID into the country, but UNHCR had said media reports that the group that may be infected with the virus have not yet been substantiated. So we don't know for now whether it was the right move to turn them away.
And of course, COVID's already in the country.
Right.
So, you know, it's not a question of these people bringing it anew and somehow that we were or in a pristine state. So again, a lot of confusion as to what we ought to do and what, especially with regard to our borders. And when we think about the world as, you know, MCO winds down and the success of our local strategies work, what will be our relationship to the rest of the world and our borders? And
whether there are limits to our humanitarianism, right? Okay, well, we'd also like to take note tonight of the changes in top posts in government agencies recently. Bursa Malaysia announced today that Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar will be its next non-executive chairman. This following the retirement of Dato Shirin Muhyiddin. Shirin will be stepping down from her role at the end of the month, and Wahid's appointment will take effect on May 1st.
Because, Melisa, some questions raised about the initial statement that was made regarding her, as you put, retirement, aspersions perhaps cast on her integrity and so on and so forth. And then, you know, and in an exchange, if we look at some of the media, the Edge reporting some of this and raising questions, I think it's something worth noting. Again, behind the scenes, beyond the COVID story, many other Malaysian stories are happening and unfolding. You can't lose sight of them.
I have to say, though, you know, that there's been a debate or questions raised surrounding the appointment of Wahid as Bursa chair. Critics have pointed out that Wahid was part of the 7-member investment panel of KWAP Akuap that actually approved the 2 billion ringgit loan to SRC International. And now, again, the same critics are raising concerns about perhaps Wahid's fortitude under political pressure, particularly because now he oversees the regulator of Malaysia's public companies, many of which are government-linked. So, again, the question is whether he is the right man for the job, whether we have a talent pool in Malaysia sufficient to ensure that these top posts are led by the people who are most capable.
Yeah,
but
it
also
does seem like a revolving door on a cast of a rather limited cast of individuals at that revolving door.
How are we doing in terms of diversity? And that's the question we need to keep the government accountable. Is this a diverse leadership that we're seeing of government agencies? And
because, you know, the loss of women at top posts at GLCs and such, also a worrying trend.
Yes, that's right. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and after this, we're going to take a look at how to reinvent supply chains for a post-COVID-19 world. Stay tuned to consider this. If you've just joined us, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan. Earlier this week, Health Director General Dato Dr Hisham Abdullah revealed that Malaysia only has 19 days supply of the US Defence Production Act. Now, this is where the federal government can dictate what equipment is produced and where it goes. Joining us on the line now to discuss this further, we have Dato Dr Rajah Rasiah, Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Asia-Europe Institute at University of Malaya. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us tonight. So you wrote an article about this, about the US Defence Production Act. And that act was actually passed during the Korean War. Why is it that you argue that Malaysia needs a similar law to mobilise production of medical equipment?
At that time when I did that with Dr. Kaur, our feeling was about taking care of essentials. I think now we have a broader way of looking at the matter. I think it cannot be seen in isolation because the war in Korea did not have the same elements of a pandemic where the spread of a virus could not be contained as it is now. It is just spreading through the whole world is affected. So in that sense, I think the way we are looking at it now is to incorporate all three, including your starting point about how to revive supply chains.
Raj, could you help us understand, you know, the downside of a strategy like this? I mean, even if it was a kind of hypothetical, instead of, say, mobilizing production through some cooperative means, through persuasion, you know, using our existing diplomatic relations to make sure that those supplies come from where they were traditionally sourced. Why those strategies as opposed to one that allows the national government to dictate terms to local and domestic producers?
I think if you're just looking at the production of protective equipment, then it relates directly to the pandemic. I think we have a broader way of looking at this, and what that actually means is that if you take two sides of a square or of a trajectory between an x-axis and a y-axis, we are looking at if the two situations here, we focus too much simply on the pandemic, simply on containing COVID-19, then we may compromise on the economy. And if we focus too much on the economy, we may compromise on the threats, challenges posed by COVID-19. Now, we need to take a balance between the two, but recognizing that both are critical. You can't have a situation where we just say, well, we'll take our health first, only because the economy will contract. The flip side of a complete focus on the pandemic to make sure there's a complete lockdown and that nobody is interacting with each other. And that would actually mean that you will now have factories closed. You will have very little transportation except for those dealing with the virus, containing people, the spread of it, as well as those that deal with bringing supplies to patients or for testing, screening, and so on. So taking that two extreme poles, then we'll have to take a balance from there. And while taking a balance is not a simple arithmetic exercise, we'll need to see that even if we took a middle line, we'll have to make sure that we have taken all precautions to see that we are not compromising on the health side of it. Right. Likewise, if we're taking a very strong focus on the health part of it, we are not going to compromise on the economy. Okay. Simply because if you lose demand, and now that you mentioned about the supply chain, it's unlikely that you'll get it back. In other words, say, yes.
Sorry, continue. So if we lose demand, you're saying that it's unlikely we're going to get it back?
Yes. Say, for example, you have a whole value chain, and that one important stage of it is supplied, the components to which is supplied by Malaysian companies. Now, if that the buyers and suppliers waiting for that supply are unlikely to wait, say, for Malaysia to scrap the lockdown and start producing. They're not going to wait. So you may lose that sort of demand, which may then affect our exports, which may then affect our the GDP of ours, gross domestic product. That's one aspect to look at.
So let's look at the government's decision then to actually open up some aspects of the economy. Many of those sectors are related to international trade. Are you happy with the way they're thinking through this or strategizing the reopening of the economy?
To some extent, yes, but the problem we have is really in terms of how they're implementing these things. For example, they have now identified certain sectors that need to be open, but they're not revealing very much to those affected to see that they have to actually go and register and wait for an approval. And they have not come up with a plan B in case it will take too long or in case this information would not reach them. So instead, what they're doing is, an example, a very simple example will be the laundry. Now, the laundry service has been opened up, as you all very much know, except for barbers and so on. They've gone back to keep them closed because of the proximity involved. But if a guy running and operating a laundromat does not seek officially permission to resume operations, he or she can get fined, I think 5,000 fines. Now, this sort of information flow is very much restricted here, and it's a problem. In the end, I feel that the authorities concerned should always rule in favor of the operators involved, because it's for them these things are being done, instead of just imposing fines. Likewise, if you have the case of exports, and I was really surprised why they ended up closing earlier gloves, as an example, gloves, masks, and so on. Gloves, we are very well known to be among the world's biggest exporters in gloves. Top Gloves, for example, is one of the leading exporters of it. Now, why should you then close that firm? Now, of course, the counterfactual argument is if you have workers going there and they carry this virus, then it will spread. Indeed, that is right. Now, the meaty minister, YB Admin, announced that the workers will be screened. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, to open up the glove factory, to me, is the right thing to do now. We are not in a situation of having COVID-19 completely out of control. In fact, there's some sort of trend suggesting that it's on the downward side, if you follow what Dr. Noor Hisham has been announcing. Right. Now, I would think you should carefully open these sectors. The glove industry will be a classic example, but you make sure that the workers involved are screened and are organized in such a way that their transport and where they enter and where they exit are all somehow monitored. Now, that would require some sort of announcement that makes them feel comfortable. I was talking to some of them. They said they're not very clear how this will be done. They're not very clear.
So there's a lack of information? You're saying there's a lack of information there, is it?
Yeah, there's a lack of information. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but I'm going to get you to stay on the line and we're going to continue this discussion more on the impact of COVID-19 on global supply chains and the opportunities that lie in the post-COVID world. Stay tuned to consider this. Thank you for staying with us on Consider This. We're continuing our conversation with Dato Dr Rajah Rasiah, Professor of Economics at University of Malaya. Now, I want to pick up on something you said just before the break. Now, you mentioned the rubber glove sector, and that's one of the many sectors in Malaysia that can that have kind of worldwide contribution of a part of the global supply chain. What other sectors are you looking at that you consider crucial to the global supply chain that perhaps are in danger of falling behind or losing out because of this MCO, because of this pandemic?
Electric and electronics will be another, apart from rubber products. The earlier one on rubber gloves comes under rubber products, but you also have electric and electronics. You have then oleochemicals that are from palm oil and a range of other goods and services, including, say, scientific equipment, aerospace products, automotive products. We have quite a number of them. And of course, in some sectors, the share of domestic production is higher, but you still have exporting firms. So I think these sectors need to be addressed. I think there are three important things that one will have to look at in that sort of context. From the information I gather from the presses, it seems like there is an attempt, and I don't have any problems with that we should also look at the COVID crisis as an opportunity to see that we indeed restructure so that we would no longer specialize in low-end activities. I think that's a good idea, but one of the things we need to do is we cannot instantaneously, in other words, we cannot now kill those golden ducks because we're looking for bigger golden ducks that lay golden eggs. Now, we need to strategize in such a way that we, without dropping them off, we are then will be using this opportunity to move on to those industries that we need to focus on. And in this, I think I'd like to mention the first one, where we've had a trend decline in Malaysian manufacturing, which is the food industry. Even in rice production, for example, milling is part of the original manufacturing in rice production. Much of rice would, of course, come under agriculture. We had 86% self-sufficiency in 1975 under Tun Abdul Razak's administration. Now we have about 70%. Now in Taiwan, they have raised it to 90%. I think these are items that suddenly surface when you have a crisis like this. We need to make sure that the supply of rice over the next 5 years indeed sufficient. Now, why should we then allow the growth, a trend growth in the deficit trade account of food production? We import lots of chilies now. We import all sorts of things now. I think we need to have a plan to ensure that domestic production will address essentials like this all the time. That could be seen as part of the Defense Production Act of the U.S. when they introduced that in Korea.
Right.
But that's just one, and I think it's an important one, regardless of whether we have a crisis now, because I've seen a trend decline, especially since 1989. We've been suffering from Dutch disease as exchange rates start rising, and how it made imports cheaper and exports more expensive. And the impact of it on smaller farmers has been far more disastrous, debilitating compared to the large plantations that we have.
So, Rajah, so what you're suggesting is, and this has been a discussion for some time, a question about food security. Would you apply the same to the question of medical supplies, things like PPE, things that have now become seen as essential that perhaps we didn't think about when we were talking about food security? Should medical supplies also come under or be dealt with in the same way?
Yes, of course, they are essentials. But they are not essentials to the point of being in the same demand curves of, say, a staple like rice, because when you have a pandemic, the demand for, say, PPEs will be that much more. But we can all put them together in those essentials and work towards that. And we can even address the question of whether we have research capabilities enough to ensure that we can quickly ramp up innovation and production so that we'll have vaccines to treat the virus. Right. That's an area that I think the whole world, I think, has been caught napping, except for perhaps Cuba, which has been doing relatively well. So I would include that, PPE, among the essentials, yes.
Okay. Well, I want to come back very quickly to what you talked about earlier, about the opportunities that lie in a post-COVID world. How can we look at repositioning Malaysia in the global supply chain as taking advantage of perhaps, moving up the value chain here? What is your suggestion on this?
I would say that once we've taken care of those essentials, the part that I mentioned in relation to food, I think we now need to focus on how we upgrade ourselves. Economies become more developed largely because they appropriate more value added for each unit of capital they invest or labor hour they put in. Now, if we take that sort of an analogy, then we are not doing really well, because we are far below countries like Taiwan, Korea, and Singapore. And since we all aspire to see Malaysia as a developed country, we should then focus on how we transform, stimulate technological upgrading so that our economic activities here will shift from low to high value-added activities. Now, to do that, I think we cannot simply abandon those at this time.
Right.
While we allow existing companies to function, I think we then must see that technologies that make this possible are indeed stimulated. That would include, say, the blueprint in 2009 that the MITI Minister, YB Dara Liking, with Tun Mahathir launching at that time, seeing the introduction of it in such a way that it actually raises value added. It actually sees the use of artificial intelligence either through robots or drones, with the sort of infrastructure that's required, like cloud computing, like digital infrastructure, as well as big data analytics. We need to see that these things are all put in place so that firms actually upgrade. For every unit of worker that is there, they are engaged in a higher value-added activity, and at the same time, they are moving on to be much more innovative in what they're doing.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have just 1 minute left. I could interrupt you. Tell us, what would you like to see the government do in the short term, short and medium term, in terms of this crisis, in terms of economic policy?
Oh, I would really like to see them making sure that they are in total control over the spread of COVID-19, and then allowing factories and firms to start operating so that the economy doesn't fall. At the moment, the WTO, for example, are predicting that 2020 world trade would fall from between 12 to 32%. And this is not an ideological organization in some ways as far as trade is concerned, because they work on trade statistics. Now, for that not to happen, we need to see the economy starting back. While we are concerned and rightfully we should be making sure that COVID doesn't really spread.
Right. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight and helping us think through this topic. Appreciate your time on that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan, signing off for this evening. Have a great weekend, folks. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you for watching, and good night.